Hello everyone, welcome back to this afternoon session. I'm Sarah, I'll be your moderator for today. I'm just about to welcome our next guest, guest speaker Michael Guthrie. But before I do, just a couple of things. It would be great to, as with all the other sessions, to let you know that we have a live stream chat. So if you think of any questions during the session, you can please feel free to pop them in the chat. And there will be room for Q&A for the last 5 minutes of the session. So I'll hand over now to Mike Guthrie. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks everybody for joining today. As she said, my name is Mike Guthrie. I'm a senior engineer at NetFoundry. And today I'm just going to be talking about taking your DevOps tooling to the dark side. It's maybe a little bit cryptic title, but it's basically just learning how we can apply using zero trust networking to our own DevOps tools that we're using every single day. All right. So just a little bit about my background, just to introduce myself. I've been doing a mix of software engineering, DevOps, and site reliability engineering for about the past 13 years. It's been kind of a mix of each throughout my career. Started doing software development at an infrastructure monitoring company. Ended up doing a lot of stuff that was, I would describe it as DevOps before DevOps was even a term. And then was a software engineer after that, and then moved back into DevOps to where it was myself and two other guys doing DevOps. It was basically us against about 100+ developers at a pretty large company, and that kept us pretty busy. From there, I moved on to doing site reliability for that same company, and basically built a department around it, as well as a knock response team and so forth. And then at my current position at NetFoundry, I'm currently leading our DevOps team. We call it our RAV team, which stands for Reliability, Automation, and Visibility at NetFoundry. And we provide hosted zero trust networking as a service. And I would describe myself as kind of a boots on the ground DevOps engineer. Love solving problems, love getting things done. And I am pretty particular about the tools that I choose and which ones I choose and which ones I don't, because I like tools that let me solve a large variety of problems and just help me get things done at the end of the day. So, all right, so let's talk about zero trust networking and what it actually is, because I'm noticing throughout our industry, this is starting to become a buzzword, much like DevOps itself, to where we throw the term around a lot, but it doesn't necessarily always have a very clear meaning. A lot of people I talk to, they don't even, they ask them, they've heard the term, and then you ask them what they think it is, and they don't necessarily even have a clear sense of what zero trust networking is. And a lot of it is just a mindset in terms of how you approach security and how you approach your networking and so forth. If you look at the box here on the left, this is kind of your traditional based networking, where it's a perimeter-based defense, to where you've got a firewall, you've got a private networking space, whether it's a private data center, a private VPC, private something, but it's basically you've got a wall around it that is your firewall, and you say, this is my fortress. Everything inside my fortress is safe because I have a firewall. And generally inside of that, you might have looser restrictions. You might have unencrypted traffic. You might have pretty open firewall rules in terms of the individual resources inside this. This could also be a Kubernetes pod, to where you say, within the confines of this pod, things are allowed to talk to each other, because I expect that, and I assume that the things inside of this fortress are safe. When you approach things from a zero trust networking mindset, you change that perspective to where you start with an assumption that say, hey, I'm just going to assume that my fortress is already compromised, and that everything inside this box could actually be volatile. And I'm not going to trust everything inside this. And in as much as I can avoid, I don't even want unencrypted traffic floating around in this space, because I'm going to assume that the network is not safe, instead of starting with an assumption that your network is safe. And so we'll get into more in terms of like how do you deal with this situation? How do you make it practical, and how do you actually connect systems together without creating all kinds of friction in terms of how you set things up. So looking at the DevOps problem And what kind of got me thinking about this originally is that we were challenged at our company to start thinking about ways that we can actually leverage zero trust networking using OpenZiti to actually secure our own technology and our own tools and so forth. And I was a little bit skeptical and so forth, but as I started thinking about it, it actually kind of, and then in conjunction with that, we started seeing we saw the big SolarWinds hack, and then the Travis CI hack and so forth. And we started seeing various compromises throughout the industry, and they kept on coming after and getting into the systems using DevOps tools. And I think that as we are approaching our DevOps technologies, you go look at the tool sets that we have and start thinking about what those tools do, and start to think about them from the mindset of a hacker, and you realize pretty much everything that we use on a day-to-day basis, it is an absolute jackpot if a hacker can compromise it. CI/CD tools. This is something that it's basically a fantastic way for somebody to compromise and inject code and executable code all throughout your infrastructure, and to be able to place it in all of the critical places in production and every environment and so forth. If they can get to your CI/CD, they've got all sorts of credentials. They've got firewall access. They've got security group access. They've probably got IAM permissions. You name it. If they can get into your CI/CD system, they basically can deploy and execute whatever is desirable for them throughout your infrastructure. That's a critical target. Start thinking about your monitoring, as this is a data mining platform for. Depending on your model, if you're using kind of a polling style monitoring, or if you're using a data collection style monitoring, either way, you basically have a data mining platform that inventories everything important in your infrastructure, brings all that data back to a central place. And in order to make it work, you have holes punched in your firewall all over the place, so that all of these things can get back to, can either talk from a monitoring server, or can talk to some sort of a central monitoring store. So, again, just from a data standpoint, in terms of the data collected from that, is a high value target. ETL, very, very similar. It's a data mining system. It's reaching out all throughout your business. It's collecting data from everywhere, and it's all your business critical data that's being mined and collected. And most people's ETL is some sort of loose collection of scripts, maybe not very well standardized, maybe auto-generated scripts, you name it, or just a whole variety of tools to deal with all the different data sources. But the standard around it can be inconsistent and loose. Data warehousing. It's a one-stop shop for all your data. Again, high value target. Config management. This is always the one that I love config management tools just because of the power that they give, but in the hacker's hands, it's the same thing. It's a one-stop shop for somebody to basically compromise or basically destroy your entire infrastructure from a single place, whether it's Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Salt, you name it. It is an absolute goldmine for someone to compromise. And the last one that I put it on here just because it's kind of a byproduct of the job that I do, because a lot of people have to do it. And in conversations that I have, very few people are actually comfortable with the setup that they're using, but basically developer access management. Your devs need to get to, they need to be able to access, the production database for a given service. And a lot of times the setup around that is looser than desired. It's like, I might have one developer team that I really want them to access only their stuff, but they might have access to a whole bunch of things in prod that I don't want them to have. And, having just even from an internal employee access setup, I've had times where that's made me uncomfortable, and I talk to other people and they wrestle with the same problem, where it's like, yeah, the only way I had to do is I just had to open the door and let everybody in, so that all the devs had access to everything, and that is uncomfortable. It's not a least privilege model, and it's a weak security posture. And yet at the end of the day, it's like, we have to figure out how to balance this and get our jobs done. All these tools are necessary for us to do our job. We need them. We depend on them. We've built an entire culture around them, and they're fantastic. But they are a target, and they are, we don't necessarily hold these tools to the same standard that we might hold our production application. And that'll kind of bring me to my next point in terms of, how do we deal with security? we'll have our security team and so forth. They want to run their audits. They want to have compliance and everything else. And well, how do we deal with that? Well, at least the stuff that I've seen and I've been a part of myself is that we play games with scope. We say, well, only the production application is in scope for the security audit, so we're only going to worry about this. And we don't include our CI/CD as part of that scope. We don't include the monitoring as part of the scope, whatever else, or the developer access, anything like that. We just look at the production application that's running, and we'll turn the security guys loose on that. We hired a pen tester. That's great. We're just going to turn them loose on that and so forth. But are we willing to do the same thing and turn them loose and let them and let everything be inspected about our own tools that we're using to get our jobs done every single day? For a production application, it's often public. We expect it to be public. We expect it to be volatile. But we don't necessarily carry that same expectation for our own tools. Our CI/CD server, our monitoring server. We expect that only trusted parties are going to access that. So we don't necessarily harden those tools in the same way that we would do for a production application. So we'll battle harden the production app. But in terms of thinking about it in terms of a real world gut check. And just kind of asking yourself this question in terms of your comfort level with what you manage every single day. Would you turn a security auditor loose on your CI/CD? Would you let them inspect your code in terms of and your configs and so forth in terms of how you're securing everything, how you've set up least privilege around your access? Would you do this with your monitoring? Would you do this with your config management? And then the other one that's significant, and I think if anybody had to deal with stuff related to Log4j in the last year, how many tools that you have open ports that are exposed to the internet, or maybe are exposed to the entire VPC or data center and so forth. And you think about those tools, and from a perspective of anything that has an open port or an open IP, if that tool, if whatever technology that is behind that open port, if it ends up having a 0 day, now you're subject to have to respond to that immediately, and it becomes a race of, can you respond to that faster than somebody can compromise it? And some places are fairly quick and so forth. And I know my company was, before we started implementing Zero Trust, we had a 0 day on one of our pieces of technology, and we were pretty fast. We had it, within 24 hours, we had our stuff dealt with. But even within that 24-hour window, we had crypto miners already injecting stuff on our systems, and it's that fast, and it's that kind of turnaround. And if we don't have to subject ourselves to that kind of response and that basically panic reaction to dealing with those situations, then we should be thinking about Zero Trust in terms of how we secure our systems. And the last one was kind of the one I talked about before is, are you comfortable with how your developers are accessing systems, how your ops team are accessing systems? Is it least privilege? Are you able to isolate what one developer can access and what others aren't? I think everybody's got those one or two people where you had to give them access and you're not entirely comfortable with it, but you had to do it anyway because they needed to do something, and finally you just got pressured and you caved and you had to do it. But are you really comfortable with that person having access to all the things that they need to in prod? So if any of those things make you uncomfortable or kind of strike home, then I will encourage you to start thinking about Zero Trust, because it could be a tool that can actually help you get your job done more effectively and actually secure your tools better. So in terms of how this came about for me is that we were at our own company, we were challenged, and so full disclaimer in terms of how this came about for me is that I work for NetFoundry, and we provide basically hosted OpenZiti, which is a Zero Trust networking technology. And I lead our DevOps team, and we were encouraged to try to dog food our own product and basically start using it for our own internal tooling. And I was a little bit skeptical on this and so forth at first, but we'll kind of go into that journey that journey in just a minute. But as we shift towards a Zero Trust model, the things to start thinking about is it is a change in how we think about it's a change in how we think about our network security. Just this simple idea of having ports exposed at any level is we just need to start thinking of that. Okay, I have a port exposed. That means it is vulnerable to scan and exploit, which is the number one way in which systems are still being compromised. Why? Because it's easy. Like anybody can grab a script off the internet and start doing it. And that's still the number one way which systems are getting infected and broken into and so forth. Because if you got ports open to the internet, scan and exploit, super easy. If somebody somehow or another, they get inside your fortress of your perimeter, they scan and exploit, because you don't necessarily know what you've left open, but they're going to be doing that, and they're going to find it pretty quickly because it's not hard to do. It's very, very easy. And so as we shift towards zero trust networking and the idea of make it dark, and when I say make it dark, ultimately I'm getting us to a place where we say, well, dark means there's no ingress at an IP or port level. There are no open ports at all, and that making it incredibly difficult, completely making it ineffective to somebody trying to do a scan and exploit style attack, because there are no open ports, there are no exposed IPs. There's no way for them to get in, not just from the internet, but even within your private network spaces. You can actually close things entirely to where there's no inbound at all. And I'll explain how this works in just a moment. But key concept in a zero trust networking world is that there are no more IPs and ports. It is a shift away from that type of thinking. The good thing about that is that you don't have to worry so much about managing IPs anymore, which is, for those of you who have to do it, it's terrible, it's clunky, it's frustrating. But you're moving towards a model where instead of IPs and ports, there's services and identities. Because really, at the end of the day, that's what granting access to systems and people is about. It's like, oh, you need to access the service, you are an identity, but not just you as a person. Your individual device might be an identity. Your laptop might be an identity. Your cell phone might be an identity. You can actually have an application be an identity, and it can get very, very granular, and you can break it down and enforce it through policy and say, hey, this person's cell phone can access just this one thing. And you can get very, very granular in terms of how you define your policies and who can access what and so forth. Now, so I've described a model of no ingress at all. So of course, a whole bunch of you might be thinking, how the heck does anything talk then if there's no open ports? And so, so this is just kind of a basic diagram trying to illustrate how a zero trust networking works, at least as defined by OpenZiti. And so imagine you've got a mesh that can kind of exist more or less anywhere when we do it for hosted OpenZiti with NetFoundry. More or less, we basically spin up what are called edge routers in the cloud, and we basically have you spin up a handful of them. So basically, you have a mesh that can be dialed into, but basically, imagine everything is outbound. You might have data center A over here, data center B over here, and everything just dials into the mesh. It establishes a secure encrypted connection, and it's an outbound dial into the fabric mesh. And by default, nothing has access to anything. But then if you decide and say, okay, this entity over here needs to have access to this service over here, okay, well then you can set up a policy or an app WAN and say, okay, yep, the endpoint over here, you can either do explicit or you can use attributes, which are like tags. You can say, okay, this entity over here is granted access to this specific service over here. And you might have 20 other services in here and so forth. But if you only want this entity or this identity to have access to this one service, you can be explicit like that, and you can define it. So imagine to me, I think of it, it's almost like it's doing in the network space what IAM permissions did in AWS, to where you can get extremely granular if you need to where it is true least privilege. But it's least privilege at a network layer. So if this person's, they might be registered and enrolled and dialed into the fabric, again, by default, they have no access to anything. They can't even see, they don't even know what is available over here until you grant access to it and you say, okay, yes, this identity over here can talk over here. And because of this model, you can have you could potentially have a data center, you could have a Kubernetes pod, you can have a cluster or VPC, you name it. You can have something that literally has no ingress at all. Like there are no open ports on any level, and everything is it's egress only. And as a result, you've massively stepped up your level of security. And there's a whole bunch of applications and tooling to where you can apply this model. But it allows you to partner this technology with a lot of the existing tooling that you have. And as a result, you're not this rogue DevOps engineer that's punching holes in the firewall every day to make all your systems work. You're actually you're connecting your systems together, and yet you're not decreasing your security posture as you do so. And a key piece of what we do with DevOps is we have to make systems talk. We have to wire stuff together. We can't get around it. And when we're able to do this with zero trust networking, we're able to do it without weakening our security posture. Because if you say, hey, I need this thing to talk to this thing over here, you can do it where all your traffic's encrypted in between these 2 points. And so you never have a point where your traffic's unencrypted, but also you're never opening a new firewall rule to make these things communicate. In terms of where ZT gets installed, there's a couple places that you can set it up. One would be like it's called an edge router. You can place an edge router inside of your private data center space. I would actually consider that the weakest security posture option. You can also install a tunneler on a specific host, or to where like it could be a laptop over here, it could be a server. You can actually install a ZT tunneler on the host itself to where the traffic exits inside of the host. But the best model that you can actually do, and this is something that's pretty cool and exclusive to OpenZiti. I don't know of any other technology that can do this, but you can actually do a fully app embedded implementation. So you can actually embed this tunneling into your application over here, and actually have it terminate inside of an application over here, to where at that point your traffic is literally never unencrypted from the point to where it enters in and it exits. There's no opportunity for intercept at all. And again, you haven't opened any ports to make anything talk. In terms of what we ended up doing when we were challenged to dogfood it internally, as I mentioned, I was skeptical because I've come from a place to where historically, in my experience, anytime it was like, okay, we're going to lock things down, we're going to tighten security around this thing or that, in my head, this is always like, okay, this is, get ready for, lots of fires, lots of things to break and so forth. Because anytime you lock something down, inevitably you're breaking all kinds of stuff because you didn't know, what's able to connect, what's not, and so forth. And it was always this painful event in previous places of my career. But we had a thing where our data warehouse, I'd kind of built it under rapid timeline as much as I could, and I had some cloud services that needed to interact with it, and so it was open to the world in terms of that IP and port, and it was just a set of credentials protecting it. And over time, this kept me up at night, and this was making me nervous and uncomfortable. And so I'm like, all right, we're going to start there, because this is kind of starting to scare me, the fact that this is just open and somebody could brute force this. And so decided to start there. And so we started there, and as we went through that, we were able to get that secured, and now all the end users are accessing it through ZT, and the ETL runners are using ZT to fetch the data and send it to the data warehouse and so forth. Once we got through the data warehouse, we're like, okay, that actually was not as bad as we expected. Let's try another thing. So then we locked down our CI/CD system using the same thing. And after the second one, we're like, hey, this is pretty cool. Let's keep it going, and let's do some more. And so now we manage our SSH access using OpenZiti, and we call it our dark bastion, because it's basically just it's an edge router that's in the VPC, but it doesn't have any open access at all. There are no open ports whatsoever for those nodes, but it's a way for us to actually get inside the VPC without exposing any ports or without exposing port 22 anywhere. We also we've moved to using Mattermost internally, which is it's like a Slack replacement. It allows us to basically have it to where the only way that you can even get to our company chat is by having ZT and using zero trust networking. And then we've gotten to the point now to where any new tool that we turn on, it just basically it's dark by default, and that's become our new standard, to where it's like, yep, if we're spinning up and using a new DevOps tool, having it zero trust is the new norm here. And I had expected that to be harder. I expected it to be more frustrating, and I have found it to really actually be pretty frictionless. And it's actually, in a lot of ways, it's simplified things, because I don't need to be subject to the same security examination and so forth, because we're not creating new openings in our security posture. We're not opening firewall rules. We're not creating new risk, because there's no new openings in terms of ways that the infrastructure could be compromised through it. For those that are probably wondering, how do you deal with public SaaS offerings and so forth? We're still working on better ways to tie those down. Unfortunately, there's still a few cases where we do have to do whitelisting because of a public SaaS offering that we can't control, and so forth. So we are having to use their outbound IPs as whitelisting and so forth, which is disappointing. There are places to where we're looking at doing app embedded to get around that. GitHub Actions is one of those examples. We're able to do a custom GitHub action. Ooh, time's running out. Okay, so I'll wrap up with this one. So my reactions moving our internal stuff with this. Again, I expected friction. I expected pain. It actually was we got done with the first one, and I was just like waiting for the fireworks, and I'm like, oh, nothing happened, nothing broke. And the reason it ended up being seamless is that with OpenZiti, it actually tracks all of the traffic for every service and every identity that is passing traffic. That's actually part of the metrics built into Ziti. So we actually used traffic as a way to validate whether or not people's configurations were working, because we could actually see, and we actually enabled the intercept to start working before we made things dark. And so we said, okay, here, install this, enroll your devices and so forth. And we turned on the intercept so that it started routing through OpenZiti. And we did that before things were dark, because we wanted to kind of soft launch with it. And because of that, we were actually able to pre-validate everything before we locked anything down. And so when the day came to where we actually revoked the public access, it ended up being a complete non-event, because we'd already validated everything was working, and we'd already worked through all the kinks and whatever else before then. And we made sure that every user and system that needed to work through Ziti was already doing so. In terms of what it's also done for us as well, is it's made it just internal access management very, very easy, to where we're able to get very, very granular. And we're able to say, it's like, oh, you need access to the data warehouse. Great, let me add the data warehouse attribute to your endpoint, and that's it. And it will just start working for you. And it's simplified a lot of that access management, to where you used to have to do that in a lot of places. And now it's just like, no, it's like we generally are funneling all our stuff through Zero Trust now. And it's simply, oh, you need access to this thing. Let me give you this attribute, and that will enable your access for the policy to be able to access this list of services. And we're able to get much more granular, and we're able to actually create the type of thing to where people can only access what they need to access. So, all right, I am about out of time, so I will wrap it there. In terms of if you're interested in exploring this some more, OpenZiti, it is an open source project. I believe in the open core model. I think you get a better result because of that. And then we also, I work for NetFoundry. We do have a Teams plan as well. We can have up to 10 free components and so forth. If you just want to try it, again, it's a hosted zero trust networking option and so forth, to give it a try. But as I mentioned, I'm a DevOps guy. I'm not a sales guy and so forth, and I'm pretty picky about my tools. But this has been one that I've been definitely able to add to kind of my Swiss Army knife of tools, because it helps me solve a lot of problems and just get more things done. And I don't have to be the security troublemaker that, admittedly, I have historically been in the past. So it's been nice to have this tool. So, all right, with that, I will leave it open to questions. We've probably just got a couple of minutes left here, I believe. So.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have any questions in the room? No more questions. And we have there aren't any questions on the chat. So just leaves me to say thank you so much for sharing your talk with us. And if anyone would like to provide feedback, they can do so via the app or at devm.io. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.